Hi everyone. I'm just so excited to be here with you. I just didn't leave the water there because get a bit of a dry mouth talking. Well, I'm the last came off the rank today, so I guess part of my duty is to firstly say that to all of you that after hearing all these amazing speakers talking about all these fascinating subjects, you only have to get through me and then you get to go and have a beer and process all this information. But I also just really want to take the opportunity to say to Zach, hats off to Zach, because not just for inviting me to speak, but he just decided to go off and organise a TEDx event in Rosebank. Incredible. I mean, if you don't try things that take you to places that are uncomfortable, you don't learn anything. So, all power to you, Zach, and it's such an incredible thing you've done. Okay, I can pretend that this is a fan, but it's actually all my notes. So I thought that I would talk to you today a little bit about human rights. But there's no need to be nervous about that. Human rights can't actually hurt you. I've noticed that in some of these TEDx presentations that some of the speakers start with a joke. So here's my joke. A human rights campaigner walks into a bar and the bartender says, "What's with the long face?" Oh, that went so loud. Okay. Let's talk then a little bit about what are actually human rights. So human rights are the inalienable, fundamental right that every human being is entitled to just for being human. They're basic rights and freedoms that every single human being in the world is entitled to. You don't have to do anything to have those rights assigned to you. And there are three foundations to the idea of human rights. The first one is that they're universal, and that means they're available to every single human being because there are no classes of human beings. There's only one group of humanity, all human beings. The second foundation is that they're inalienable. That means those rights can never be taken away from you, ever, under any circumstances. And the third foundation is that they're indivisible, which means every part is part of the whole. So you can't just maybe take one human right away from someone and leave them with a bunch of other human rights and say, look, it's not ideal, but they've still got quite a few left. You can't really say that. Basically, your human rights are either violated or they're not. Now, a lot of people, maybe many of us here, don't really think a lot about human rights. For a lot of us, if we ask most Australians, do you believe in the idea of human rights? Of course, people would say, yes, I do, but what do they mean? For many of us, the idea of human rights is a kind of abstract concept. The idea that, we associate it with the most heinous, the most cruel, the most violent, the most destructive acts that humans commit on one another in faraway places, that we see in authoritarian regimes where people are taken in the night, where they're tortured, where people are persecuted because of their ethnic background. But the fact is that human rights are actually something more basic and simpler than that, and they are just as important here as they are anywhere. And another way of really thinking about human rights is the idea of fair and just treatment. The idea that every human being in our society should be treated fairly and under the same rules, that every single human being in our society is able to have the same rights and basic freedoms as each other. And that's very important for us to think about because there are many individuals and many marginalised groups in our society that don't enjoy those basic rights and freedoms, that don't do it. And one of the most interesting things about human rights since I've been involved in it is the idea that the people who think least about human rights, obviously, are the people whose basic rights and freedoms are guaranteed. And then the people whose rights have been deprived, the people whose human rights have been violated, know about them all too well. That's the thing. And for me, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was probably like a lot of other people in Australia that I hadn't really thought about human rights at all. And then I started this journey because at the time I was starting to get more and more uncomfortable about the way we were treating groups of people who were fleeing war-torn countries, fleeing persecution, and arriving, here on our shores, seeking asylum, seeking protection, seeking safety. And, under all the international obligations that we've signed, we have that obligation to provide that to them, but we didn't. We took these, innocent people who were already traumatized, and we sent them to these far-off hellholes that we paid for and built and managed. And one was on Nauru, and one was on Manus Islands in Papua New Guinea. And I couldn't believe that we would be capable of doing that. We know these people are innocent. We've sometimes fought wars in far-off places to free people from the sort of tyranny that they're escaping, and yet when they come here, we punish them for it. So I decided I wanted to find out a little bit more about all of this. So I decided to go overseas to some places in the world where the number of people fleeing persecution, the number of forcibly displaced people was so much higher, because we're talking about just 3,000 people that were subjected to this incredible policy and who are still being subjected to it. So I went to places in the world where the numbers were massive, and one of those places was Greece, a country that is half our size, less than half our size, that almost went broke in 2010. And in 2015 and 2016, for 15 months, more than 1 million people crossed the Med from Turkey into a group of islands down the eastern Mediterranean, down the eastern Aegean. And for the most part, the Greek population, the local communities, helped them. I mean, they're not all the stories, the best stories, because there aren't all the resources, but in general, their attitude was, we need to help these people, and it was a question of self-respect. And probably the most pivotal thing that happened to me in these journeys that I took was through one single man that I met. And he was a Greek fisherman called Stratos Vlamios, and he came from the island of Lesbos. And I'd read about him, and I'd read about how he'd spent 15 months hauling hundreds of people out of the sea who were crossing over to his island. And so I decided we should go and interview him, so I sent him all these messages, and I sent emails, and I Facebook Messenger, everything, but he just never replied. Because I don't know if you know any Greek fishermen, but they're not really that good with scheduling and stuff like that. So anyway, so what we decided we'd do is we would just go there. So we went there, and Lesbos, this island of about 79,000 people, about the same size as Bendigo on Mackay, they experienced 700,000 of those million people coming in 15 months. Thousands of people every day sometimes. And on the northeast corner of Lesbos is this tiny little village where Stratos is from, called Skalaskimanis. It's 140 people, just fishermen and their families, and these incredible Greek grandmothers that get up at dawn and clean the whole town 10 times and then cook all day. And we went to that village and we sat in a little cafe, and the first day he didn't come in, and then the second day we saw him, and I went over to him and I said, Stratos, hi, I come all the way from Australia to talk to you, and I sent you messages and emails and everything. He never got back to me and everything, and he said, so you wanted to meet me? And I said, yeah, and he said, okay, so now you meet me, like this. And so then we sat down and we did this interview. And he told me some amazing things. He said that before all this started happening, he was like us. Every night they turn on the news, they see these horrific scenes from places like Syria or civil conflicts in North Africa, and at the end of dinner they just turn them off. But then one day, across the horizon, early one morning, these boats started coming, these flimsy little rafts that were made for one trip, that could probably fit 10 people with 30 people inside them. And many of those people have never seen the ocean before. And many of those people, it might be their third time, and their third trip. And for many of those people, on their second trip or their first trip, they witnessed other people dying, other people drowning. And he said that they didn't know what to do, and they went down to the beach, and they started getting on the beach, and these people would arrive, and they would look in their faces, and they were so scared, were so traumatized. And the local people, they would, they'd put their arms out, and they would bring them on the beach, and they would say, "Don't worry, you're safe now, it's going to be okay." And they did that for that whole period, and eventually more and more organisations came down. And he said to me, people say that you can't help, people who say that you can't help people like this, they've never experienced what I've experienced, what we've experienced. How can you not help a person, who's struggling, who's scared? And he said to me also that in all that time, that 500,000 people that came in this sort of 5-kilometre radius of their village, there was never any trouble. In fact, everyone was so thankful, everyone was so grateful, because if you extend hospitality and welcome like that, it's normally reciprocated. These people were so grateful. And he also said to me, I never really thought about it, but until this happened, but maybe one day it's going to be me. I mean, 6 years ago in Syria, Syria is like a country almost as big as Australia. Had a tourist industry as big as Australia. There's not much tourist industry there now. And a highly educated population, a pretty relatively wealthy country in the region. Who would have thought that 6 years later, whole swathes of their population, half their population would be displaced, and a quarter of their population would make these long, terrifying journeys, leaving everything behind, and jump on a boat that's very dangerous, go all the way to Stratus's tiny little village. So he said that, one day it might be me, one day I might have to pick up my wife and pick up my child and go and find safety. And when I get there, I want someone to say, "Don't worry, you're safe." I don't want there to be a wall. I don't want me to find, "You're not welcome here and you're a criminal." So that taught me a lot about, empathy. And once I met him and talked to him, I realised that the thing that I really wanted to do was to try and develop a bit more empathy in the way we think about people in our own society who don't enjoy the same basic rights and freedoms. And there's a writer, an American writer, who started a big organisation to try and combat global poverty called Jacqueline Novogratz, and she said, the quality that is most important for us to strengthen us in ourselves is empathy, because it gives us the greatest hope for our collective survival. And I really think one of the issues around the people who have the rights not speaking up for those who don't is this problem with empathy. It's about, putting yourselves in the shoes of others. It's about understanding the idea that the way we treat every single human being in our society has to be the same as the way we expect to be treated ourselves, or our family, or our neighbours, or our community. And if that's not happening, it's on us to really stand up and speak up about that, because this is our society. And one of the things that I think we often forget about society is that society is just made up. No one just came and dropped it on us and said, "Okay, these are the rules." Like a whole bunch of people before us invented society, and they said, "We're going to organise it like this." But the thing about that is that if a bunch of people made it before, then a bunch of people now can unmake it, or we can change it and we can make it better. And I really believe we can. I really believe we can. So I'm just going to tell you another little thing about human rights, maybe take it down a little bit further in a more personal way, and that was best articulated by this American philosopher who wrote a book on justice and fairness in the early 70s called John Rawls, and he wrote that the urge to act justly comes from the desire within all of us to express who we are and what we are fully, as free beings with the liberty of choice. And I think, what he's talking about is something that we can all relate to, and that is, there's no time in our life when we probably feel more powerful, more contented than when we can be ourselves, when we can express ourselves. We can be that person for all their flaws because we're with a group of friends or family or in an environment where it's okay to be you. And that's a beautiful experience that we all know. Experiences that we also know, which aren't quite as beautiful, is where we have to hide a part of ourselves from other people, where we feel ashamed to have a certain part of ourselves, and in many cases, punished just for being who we are. Now, this idea of expressing yourself fully, warts and all, no matter what colour you are, no matter what you look like, no matter your racial and religious background, your ethnicity, your sexual preference, your gender, how annoying you are, this idea of being able to fully express who you are out there in the world is all about dignity. That's part of dignity. And the thing that we need to understand a little bit about people whose rights are violated is that part of that, the most wounding part, perhaps, at least the most wounding part or injurious part emotionally and psychologically, is this idea of having your dignity taken away. Your dignity taken away. And part and parcel of that is the idea of humiliation. So, all of us here, even though we haven't lived in war zones where bombs have been dropped on us, or even though we haven't been locked up and tortured because we're the wrong ethnic group, we all understand the idea of humiliation and how painful it is. And we need to understand that if you can recall that, how that feels, just imagine being one of these people that have arrived here seeking asylum and their dignity's been stripped away and their humiliation they feel is daily, every day, for the last 7.5 years. And the worst part about it is that dignity that's stripped away and that humiliation they feel hasn't been inflicted upon them by another person. It's been inflicted upon them by a system, like our system. An institution that's created with the exact purpose of humiliating them and taking their dignity away. That's the job. To stop other people coming, to show them that they're bad, that they're not welcome here. And all of us, if we know about that, are party to it. So I think trying to think a little bit more about this idea of dignity and humiliation and how important it is to you, and how painful it is for people, innocent people, just for being the human being they are. To be humiliated like that is terrible. I just wanted to be I'm sorry that it's a little bit like this, but I actually feel that there's a lot of hope in telling stories like this. I'm just going to tell you one last story. So last weekend, I went down to Melbourne to shoot a documentary with these two amazing Kurdish guys. One's called Farhad Bandesh and the other guy's called Mozazimi, and they, like so many people, they arrived here in 2013 fleeing persecution in Iran. Kurdish people are persecuted a lot in Iran. They're not even allowed to talk their language, and they arrived here, and last week one of them was released, a few weeks ago one of them was released, and back in December the other one was, and they're artists and musicians and also very quite prominent voices in the struggle against this regime of the federal government. And so we went down there and had this incredible time with them, but one night when I was there, Farhad said, "We have to go back to the Park Hotel after dinner." And I said, "Oh, okay, why is that?" He said, "Because one of the guys in there, some young guy, is not doing well. And we need to get on the phone and talk to him." So we went back to the Park Hotel in Carlton, where there's still 11 refugees. 7.5 years they've been held, first in Manus, and then sent here. And this particular guy's been in hotel detention for 18 months. And what that means is that for 18 months, he spends 23 hours a day in this room. And they put tinted glass on the windows so that we can't see him. Except at night you can see him, so we went back at night. But in the day you can't see him. And his 1 hour a day that he has, he can leave his room and spend it in his corridor or on the roof, where he's surrounded with a bunch of these Serco guards with their walkie-talkies blaring and aggro attitude. And it's day in, day out. This kid, his name's Don Khan, he's a Rohingya. He's this beautiful kid. And he turned up here when he was 17 and now he's 24. And this has been his existence during all those formative years. You know, my son Damo's just over there. He's 19. Just imagine, you know, someone in your family at 17, you know, with everything ahead of them, and they have to spend 7 years not just locked away for no reason, but their dignity taken, humiliated every day, called a criminal, a second-class human. So this kid were on the phone with him and he said, I don't think I want to, what's the point of me living anymore? Like every day is the same. You know, I'm treated like I'm worthless, like I'm nothing, I have nothing to do. Now, the thing is, I think Australia is an absolutely incredible country, and I think Australians are decent people, and I believe that. And we're also so proud of the way we come to the aid of people who are in trouble. You know, like this idea that we go and help people when there's floods, you know, or bushfires, and we run in there and we don't really care who we're saving. And that idea that we do that is almost part of our national character. But for some reason, there's this sort of indifference towards groups of people, not just refugees, but our Indigenous people as well, other groups, other individuals, where we kind of went missing. You know, and the thing is, we can be proud of all those things we've done during those disasters, but it's hard to be proud of who we are when we know there are people in our society who don't have the same basic rights and freedoms as we do, and we stand by and we say nothing because, like I said before, it's our society and we really can change it. And there's some hope there too, because the idea that collectively we can talk together and make those changes, and I assure you that if we all did that, if we all shook off that indifference, those things would change. The problem at the moment is that it's difficult for us to make the connection, and it's difficult for us to shake off that indifference, so that when people are in situations like that poor kid, we're not speaking up for them, it just goes on. So I would urge everyone to think a little bit more about what we have and how lucky we are, how easily we'd be willing to give up all those freedoms ourselves, and also the fact that the freedoms we have are not guaranteed, that we can't take them for granted. We sometimes think that human rights might be this graph. You know, it starts here back in the feudal times when the only people who were free had power and status, and it's somehow sort of gone like that, but it doesn't go like that. It goes like this. And it doesn't always go in the right direction. So I think that if you find a space in your life, in even some minuscule way, somebody help him up. Okay. No, that's right. Yeah, I think the idea of speaking up collectively to make those changes, we can do it, and it's powerful. And it's powerful for ourselves, and it's powerful for us collectively as a society, and we can actually make society a better place through doing that. But thank you.